Welcome to Wines and Wonders with Kirsten Fox. True stories with a side of wine. Looking for inspiration for your life and your wine glass? This is your podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Wines and Wonders with a Somm and a Shaman. Dannielle and I are here today. So excited to talk with you guys, continuing our seasonal investigation of getting ahead of the end, or what happens as someone is approaching the end of their life, and energetically with both the person and the family, and what are some of the great ways that people can approach this in terms of their own power, and what are some of the hard things that go on and the decisions that have to be made, and that. So today we are going to be moving into a new direction, which is really exciting. So Dannielle, why don't you bring us up on, just kind of bring people up if they're just starting in on this, just refreshing their memory of what we talked about recently.
We have covered the day it all changes, when the diagnosis or the information comes down that a family member, loved one, whomever we may be taking care of, receives news that their life is changing through a diagnosis, through something that is medically happening. Then we talked about what happens with loss of independence. We talked about the right to die. And today we're talking about how to be prepared when we recognize the signs that life and the quality of life is changing for one of our family members or dear ones. And what happens when we turn toward it, we embrace it. We recognize this is the direction that life is now moving in, and we all get on board and we say, okay, let's move with this together.
So, yes, this is a very interesting piece because most people, as they reach towards the end of their lives, don't want to focus on what is happening to their bodies or their brains or their abilities. They just want to avoid it. Mm-hmm. It's hard to look at. And so everybody goes into this putting their heads under, like the ostrich, mm-hmm. in the ground. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we focused on last week, certainly. And then my family, mm-hmm. had a different example.
Right.
Because my mom was so pragmatic, and she saw these kinds of things going on in her life, as did we girls. But interestingly, my mom took a hold of this. So, if you're talking about embracing what is going on, mm-hmm. like you said, turn towards it,
yeah.
versus turn away from it,
right? Or push it away, or try to come to it from a place that says, I'm only going to deal with the very next thing that I have to do, and then I'm going to shelve it, right? Because that's a way that some of us will move through things. It's the fire drill situation, right? Where it's like, okay, this is happening, I'm going to deal with it, and then I'm going to put it back up on the shelf, and I'm not looking past this one event. But it can be a very different experience if we embrace it and we look past the event and start to ask ourselves what's coming down the road.
Well, what I have to share then is my experience with my mom and what she did, because it does stand up as as an example of getting ahead of it. Mm-hmm. And some of the piece that we were able to be a part of at the end of her life, where I think if she hadn't been so proactive and pragmatic, we wouldn't have been in a level of that piece. Mm-hmm. It would have been a fire drill, like you just explained. As I look back on my mom's at the process with her, we ended up, and you may have followed us through the podcasts here, you guys that are listening, and we started with my mom hearing the diagnosis of dementia, And that was in her mid 60s. So that's, she was definitely young enough to figure out what was going on and what was going to happen. So she immediately, as soon as she was diagnosed, she decided to make me her healthcare power of attorney. So I was able to make, if she couldn't make them for herself, I could make healthcare decisions for her. And then she made my sister her her financial POA. So my sister was able to start to help her with bills and any kinds of decisions that she made down that path, which was nice because it did help us split that. We're lucky that we had other siblings to help with this,
Mm-hmm.
that I had other siblings. Then also my mom started realizing that the walls were going to close in on her, and she had one thing she wanted to do, and that was see Panama. So immediately her bucket list became
Mm-hmm.
very important to her. So we figured out a way to get down to Panama and have a lovely time with her down there. And the discussion started about what is quality of life
Mm-hmm.
to you, Mom? I, as her healthcare POA, I needed to know what defined a day that she loved versus a day she didn't love.
Mm-hmm.
Because I realize as I've gotten older, I always thought we all liked to do it. I would ski every day, all day long, if I possibly could. My mom, it was like when we would go on ski trips with our family, I mean, you could just see that she was doing it with like one of those fake smiles on her face when we'd go up to the mountain, and she'd be like, "This is so fun." And, I'm like in my element, and she is just doing it for the family, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I did have that perspective that suddenly, now I have children, and I've
Mm-hmm.
certainly spoken for them when they were little about what I thought they wanted in their lives, but for another adult, I've never spoken for what they would want in their life. And so that became front center, what my mom views as her quality of life.
Right.
So maybe we could talk a little bit about what does that mean to people? How does that getting ahead of that decision of quality, what happens with that, Dannielle, energetically?
The quality experience is one where you feel at peace and in alignment with what you're doing and who you really are and what it is that truly lights you up. So, my language, the way I would talk about this, is to say that when we're in a place where we feel like we are experiencing a healthy, good quality of life, that soul part of us is in complete alignment with the action and the day-to-day things are that we're doing, where we're not in a place where we're doing these things wishing we weren't. We're doing all this stuff just getting through it so we can get to the stuff that we really like. And depending on where we are on that spectrum, that's when we start to look at our quality of life. What is our quality of life? Because it's that quality, right? We could even start to break down this word, quality. What does it mean? Well, we could use an example of recognizing using a material object, buying something that is of good quality and lasts, and buying something that is not of good quality and doesn't last. And how do you treat those things even? I mean, this is something that we don't think about. But if we take 1 second right now to think about it, when we have something that we value, that we see that there's good quality in it, we have a tendency to cherish it a little bit more. We have a tendency to treat it with more respect, with more reverence, right? Versus the cheap thing that we're like, whatever, it's fine.
Right, if it
I
breaks,
lose it, if it breaks,
yes, no big
deal.
That
And
reverence, that word
yeah.
reverence and cherish.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, because when we hold something, like you're saying, you've got a material object, but if you're holding it, it's like it has some kind of energy to it if it's got that high quality.
Right. Right. So okay, that's a material example, but coming back to our quality of life, right, what is happening internally? Do we come to our days and our families and our situations and hold that same kind of reverence and cherish it, frankly, to be able to say, wow, look at what I get to do. Look at where I am. I feel blessed. I feel content. That's another way to look at it, is that place where internally, when we are content and we can rest and relax inside, even if we have a busy, hectic day. Even if our day is like, wow, I'm running from one thing to the next because that's what my day looks like. But internally, there's an overall quality of peace and contentment because I'm in alignment with what my life looks like, versus I hate what I'm doing. I don't want to be doing it. I'm begrudgingly dragging myself through it. And I much rather be somewhere else doing something else with other people.
Oh, we've all been there.
We have, yes. Yes, we have.
I just got to hope that it's not necessarily all the time. A majority is spent in the content, cherished time.
Right. Or if we've spent a significant amount of time in the other, that we begin to recognize, like, I don't want to keep doing it like this, right? So quality of life in this situation that we're talking about, when we can have that foresight and look at and recognize what is happening, unlike what we talked about last week, where, we recognize it, we see it, but now we're just in reaction mode to try to figure it out, fix it, deal with it, whatever the circumstance is. But here we're talking about, okay, what is that quality of life? And like the questions that you had for your mom, how do you want to spend the rest of your time? What is it that makes you happy? What is it that makes you content? Where's that line in the sand that when you cross it, you hit that point where you're no longer in alignment with what's happening,
with who you are,
exactly.
It was so interesting when you say it that way, because that is exactly when I started asking her what her quality of life meant to her. And my mom had always been an athlete. I mean, her whole life. Very, very talented
Except
athlete.
Skiing, apparently.
She did not like skiing. I think it was the cold.
A California athlete. Yes. Southern California athlete. All right.
But amazing athlete. And also into her senior years. I mean, she went to the Senior Olympics in pickleball. Leading edge of pickleball that is sweeping the country now. But she said to me one of the things that I would never have thought of, because she also loved to read. I watched my mom read a lot. And she said, if I'm ever in a wheelchair, I'm done. I don't want to live. If I can't walk anymore, if I can't move, take me out in the sense of, I'm done. That's not me anymore. And I really had a moment to myself to say to myself, if I had made the decisions for my mom without asking her, I would never have thought that, because for me, being in a wheelchair just would mean I'd get more reading time, which I'd already seen my mom love to read. So I would have thought she could have crossed over into, well, I guess I'll just read more in my life. And she was defining, that was an absolute clear definition of what quality of life it was to her, was let me be able to walk and move and use my body the way I feel like I can. So that was a very clear.
Yeah. And we're talking about your mom and her dementia diagnosis and what would happen in that state of beingness if suddenly she was confined to a wheelchair. Right. So just to delineate that, because we all know there's so many people, who make a great life, but this is your mom in this situation, and that was her quality of life. She was saying, look, this is changing. My mental faculties are changing, and I don't want to have this slip and my physical body slip, and then all of a sudden just be confined to sitting in one place.
I mean, right. I mean, we all know that we've got an amazing athlete in town here, Chris Waddell, in Park City. I mean, and he's in a wheelchair and climbs, I think, Mount Kilimanjaro recently.
Right.
I mean, like, so
Yeah.
that's not the limiter.
Yeah.
It was her definition
Correct.
of what it was.
Yep.
And so it was really, really important for me to have those conversations as her caregiver, in the sense that I knew, and I will say, I doubt that many families have that conversation. We had to, because we were getting ahead of my mom's eventual known, predictable decline.
Right.
So would I have, I've never had this conversation, for example, with my dad.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's living with someone, you know, he's got a wonderful wife, and maybe they've had the conversation, but I haven't had the conversation. And I think as a child of someone who you may be taking care of, that is a conversation that could really be helpful to make the future decisions you're going to be a part of, is knowing those quality of life issues.
Well, I have to say, Kirsten, since, you know, I had a front row seat in witnessing you going through this with your mom, and all the conversations you and I have had around ahead of the end, and those conversations, I did actually start having these conversations with my mom and my dad, who are not at all even in the ballpark of decline in that way at this juncture in their lives. But it got me thinking, like, start at least having the conversations now. Start to ask those questions. And frankly, we're not in a defensive.
Yes.
Right? And isn't that, you and I have talked about this so much that, you know, perhaps maybe through our discussion this season, it plants some seeds for people to help them to recognize, like, okay, these conversations eventually will happen around our kitchen table. So when and where and how do we have them? And it's actually just right here in this moment that I'm realizing being able to have the conversation when this is not the situation actually creates a much easier entry into the conversation, because we're not in, or my parents, it's not me who would be in the defense mode, but my parents are not in a defense mode. They're not looking at me and all of a sudden being defensive about, like, well, that's not happening to me. Well, that's not how it really is, right? Those places where when all of a sudden we start the conversation because we're seeing something that can have a different energetic, but getting ahead of it anyway. And Sandy, she was great with that.
She sure was. And, you know, in fact, she was the one that called. We had these conversations. She was living in her own home, and then she was the one. She got lost one time driving home, could not find her way home. She lived in San Diego her whole life, and she couldn't find her way home, and that scared the heck out of her. I can't even imagine how scary that would be. And very shortly after that, she got very sick and lived in a house with stairs, and her master bedroom was at the bottom of the house, and then the main floor was on the main level, you know, kitchen and all that, and she could not get to her bedroom. She couldn't get to her medications. I mean, she was that sick. And between those two things happening very closely together, she called it. She said, I think I'm ready to move into a place to help myself. I can't live here any longer and be safe. And so she got ahead of that as well. We did not have to rip out the rug from under her. That I think happens in so many families where, you know, someone is pulled from their home kicking and screaming, which I totally understand. I love where I live. But with my mom, she recognized that she needed to be a different place. And I think part of this is my mom was also a control freak. absolute definition of control freak. So as she got lost and as she couldn't take care of herself very well at her house, she started going, well, how can I control it? Well, I should have a house on the, one level, and I should have people checking on me, and I shouldn't be driving anymore. So anyway, then, I got involved to help her, find a place. What does that do as someone is going in their lives? And they, like, what's the difference between my mom taking control of that decision versus a family having to come in, or a spouse or a friend having to come in and say, you know what, you need to move. You need to stop driving. What are those differences?
Well, in your mom's situation, where her control freakness actually ended up being a blessing for her at the end, because I'm sure it could have created challenges for herself and those around her in the earlier years.
We shall not speak of those.
But in the end, it really served her well. Okay, so in your mom's situation, she recognizes it. She says, well, this is not working for me. I don't like this, essentially, right? Essentially, the internal mechanism says, I don't like this. This doesn't feel safe. Because that's really, Kirsten, people who have a strong desire and need and want and pattern of wanting to control everything, at the bottom of that is really, it's about safety.
Yes.
Yeah. So her safety mechanism kicked in, and she realized this doesn't feel safe. It needs to look different. But regardless of that being the driver, the person who recognizes it and says, okay, it's time for a shift and a change to happen, and then the family members can come in and support that, it creates a dynamic where nobody gets thrown into that place of feeling victimized or feeling resentful or feeling burdened by what is happening. In those situations where, the family members, the friends, the loved ones, whomever it is, recognizes, hey, this person probably needs to have a different kind of living scenario due to these things that are happening. Their quality of life is changing. Their health, their mental capacity is changing. And they're the ones who make that decision, and that person isn't on board. Now what happens is you're in a power dynamic. You're in a dynamic where one person's telling another person what needs to happen and how it needs to go. And frankly, nobody really loves that. And when it comes to a place of loss of independence, you no longer get to live in the home you've lived in for decades. You don't get to drive anymore. You don't get to cook for yourself anymore. We're back in that place of feeling like we no longer have a right to exist, a right to actually move through our lives. And it can create a dynamic where they're angry, they get defensive. The person who loves and cares about this person is trying to do the right thing to be helpful, but it can be a contentious situation, which all the way around puts everybody into a dynamic that we call the victim drama triangle, where somebody's the victim, somebody's the perpetrator or the bad guy, and somebody's the rescuer. And when we get caught in that dynamic, we get limited to moving around those three roles, and somebody plays one of them. And it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good for anybody. Versus the situation that you had going on with your mom, which is where she made an empowered decision and said, I don't want to do this anymore, and therefore was willing to receive the assistance and the help that you and your sisters were there to offer her, and for, the help that the caregivers to where she moved to were able to offer her. So it creates a different back to quality of life. It creates a different quality of engagement. And not everybody is going to have a situation like you had with your mom. I mean, they exist. People get it. They realize, they turn toward it. They embrace it. They say, okay, yes, I understand this is what's happening. So, whether I like it or not, I'm willing to go, in this direction, versus feeling as the child, the family member, whomever your relationship role is, when you're having to make that decision, sometimes for you, what it does is it puts you in a place where you feel bad. You feel like you have to be the bad guy. You feel like you're hurting their feelings. You feel, and then what can happen is there's a tendency to come into that role feeling like, well, I'm just doing this for your own good. And you feel bad about it, maybe internally, which is just one small step to being angry about it. To being angry that you're forced to be in this situation, to make these decisions that nobody is liking, and it creates a lot of emotional strife. And I think that's what so many people end up bumping up against when there hasn't been the conversations that get to happen ahead of time, where we recognize what those markers are. So with that, I think we will take a short break.
Thank you to Uplift Gift, our sponsor today. Uplift Gift is a gift box company that you can use to send beautiful, comforting items to your friends around the country who may be going through challenging times. These days when it is harder to get out and grab a bunch of beautiful things from around different stores in your area and then box them up and get them to the post office, Uplift Gift is there for you to select lovely items, including caramels and beautiful organic teas and a pashmina that you can send to your friends around the country if they need some uplifting. So thank you again to Uplift Gift for sponsoring the show today.
Welcome back to Wines and Wonders, inspiration for your life and your wine glass.
Welcome back to Wines and Wonders. We have a special guest on the show today. I decided it might be really interesting for everyone to hear from my sister, who was involved in moving my mom from her house of however many years to the new place, the independent living place that also had assisted care and a memory care unit and all that. So basically a full service operation, but she was moving into independent living. So I've got my sister, Allison Henry, who was the one who got the phone call from Mom. So hello, Allison, today.
Hi there.
What was it like getting the call that you were the one that was going to have to go out and help Mom move out of her house?
I just thought, well, lucky me. I'm so excited to go out there and move her. I'm being a little facetious there, but it was a lot of pre-thinking and work.
What started, what was the process of when you got this call? Like what were the things you had to do before you even got there?
Well, we had somebody with her and she started to box up the house. I had to kind of coordinate with another program that helps elderly people move into independent living. And I had to contact them and we had to coordinate everything that was going on. When they came and got my mother's stuff, toys, everything. And it was good that we had them. I would highly recommend people do that in the future. But it was a lot of work.
So I've forgotten about using that company. So they were able to, so you were working with them ahead of time, and they were, taking us, they made an assessment of how much was going to fit in Mom's new unit and all that. When you flew in, take us through the process. You've worked with this company. They've got, kind of the logistics of the move figured out. But what happened when you flew in? Tell us about your few days there with Mom.
Well, it was a lot of work, as I said. Um, and it was difficult because mom couldn't remember things. And so um, we had this lady there helping her pack, and just things like, um, you know, we'd pack up some boxes, and then in the evening time, my mom would unpack the boxes. and it was so difficult because we left big notes on the boxes. Mom, do not touch this box. And we kept telling her, don't go in this room. I mean, we tried everything to keep her away from the boxes. And by God, every morning she'd just have those boxes unpacked. And she kept saying, you know, I don't understand. I mean, the boxes, there's all these boxes and I got to get them unpacked. And I'm like, no, Mom, we got to get those packed. And so there was just a lot because of, you know, her not remembering things. And it made for funny times. You know, we had to laugh. We had to do that kind of stuff because it was quite stressful. It was quite stressful on my mom. And, you know, I kept trying to get her, you know, away from the house while we were doing all this. And she just wanted to be there. And so it was difficult on all of us. So when there was something funny, we immediately, you know, just laughed and let off a little bit of energy.
What's a funny story? What happened? Like, what's a funny story you can remember when you were saying you found some funny things going on?
Well, one time she came up to us and she said she had a bag of vitamins and stuff like that, and some prescription things in there as well. And she said, you know, I'm going to go put these away. And I was busy. And the other girl who was helping us, she was on the phone. And so I didn't go, well, where are you going to put them, Mom? And she just said, I'm going to put these away. And I said, okay. And a few minutes later, I said, where did you put those vitamins? And she said, well, I put them away. And I'm like, okay, away. What do you think? Where do you think those are, Mom? And we looked and we looked and we looked. We looked in the cars. We looked out front. We looked out back. We looked every box. I mean, we just spent all this time. And when I was on doing things, I had heard my mom pulling the trash can out front to be emptied. And I just thought, I wonder if she had put everything in that trash can. And so I walked outside and I pulled the lid off, and by God, she had put her prescriptions in there, all of her pills, everything, and some gorgeous silver pieces and some crystal pieces. And it was amazing. I mean, I just started laughing about it. To this day, I wonder how many things my mom threw out. So
How many things you didn't catch?
we did, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
I remember you guys one of the things you were doing was throwing things into a U-Haul that my son was going to be flying out to drive back to my house. Things that weren't going to make it to Mom's house, but the three girls, we all decided that you were thinking this shouldn't be given away, but it also doesn't fit in Mom's house. And I remember we got into some of these boxes and I found a bag of change and dollar bills and money. And we had also all of her dog brushes and her trash bags and all of these things. It was so funny. But is there anything, Allison, to conclude with your experience with this that you would say to someone who was facing moving a parent out of a home, possibly not with dementia, but either way, what are some ideas to maybe make it easy on the other person and yourself? I mean, you've already cited doing a lot, laughing. Anything else you'd say?
The company who helped us was a godsend because, they moved everything over. They hung up my mom's clothing. They hung pictures. they did all sorts of stuff so that when my mom came in to the independent living area, it looked like her house. And that it was so amazing to have that, where she's not having to walk into some cold place, but she's got her stuff already hung and put up on the walls. And so I think if people can do that, I think it's a great thing. Just keep your mother or father busy and out of the house, and then hopefully when it's time, you go over there and everything feels like home a little bit to them.
So even if they're not using a service, having one sibling over, putting things up, like that, the process of walking into this new place with the sad loss of the home on one side, walking into a place that has your familiar stuff, you think made a huge impact on Mom?
Huge. I mean, just so much. I would do it again in a heartbeat that way. But yeah, I would highly recommend somebody do that, whether it's a company or a sibling or whomever. But definitely it made a difference.
It feels like it helps that transition be much smoother and comfortable and familiar, particularly with your mom, and knowing that in her situation, it was dementia, that there was a familiarity that she was walking into instead of that place of feeling overwhelmed. Like, we all know what it feels like to move and to walk into an empty house that you look at and you think, oh my God, now I got to set everything up that I just packed. Right?
Yeah.
And to be able to remove that for them and have them kind of just move from their situation into a very familiar home environment, even though it's in different locations, different facility possibly.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, there are parts we can laugh about. Kirsten, I think you got more money from Mom than those coins. I think what? Where are those? And you got all the toilet paper.
Oh, that's right.
Isn't that,
I did get,
especially these days, toilet paper is worth a lot.
Saved it.
I did. You're right. I was like, toilet paper? Are you kidding me?
And of course, I didn't see what was in those boxes. And you scored.
Well, Allison, all I can say is thank the Lord you were there to move her, and just appreciate your help in being a light for Mom as in the end of her life, a few years. Anything else that you'd add as a daughter, and in terms of perspective of we're focused on today is Mom's ability to get ahead of the end, to really have focused on, turn toward the problem, not away from the problem. Is there anything you'd want to add about being the daughter of a daughter of a mother who approached it that way, and what that did for you?
Oh, it was a huge relief. I mean, huge. We didn't have to fight too hard to get the car away from her. And it just, it took some pressure off of us. Right. And I can't thank her enough for doing that. She made her wishes very vocalized and written down too. So we had a good idea going into it before she started losing her ability to remember. And her looking towards it and getting the insurance, I can't tell you how much that helped me. And I'm sure my sisters.
Allison, thank you so much. I love you. And thank you for taking time out of your day to spend a little moment with us talking about Mom's move.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Wines and Wonders with a Som and a Shaman, continuing our conversation today about getting ahead of the end.
and the difference of what that does energetically to both the person who's aging and to the family and loved ones around them, who maybe care for them or worry about them, or whatever's going on in terms of their coexistence. And so we just were going over what happened in terms of decision making as she heard the diagnosis, and then quality of life and what does that mean, and then when she realized she needed to move and she needed to stop driving. So what she did then is, and we were a part of hearing this, she was always very honest with us. And so when she started telling us what was happening, we all realized what was going on. And so I flew out and we started doing, it was kind of like, looking for an apartment for your college student, and we went, in fact, I have to tell you, as we talk about the elderly, I keep flashing to my teenager, because it's so much like a teenager, or even a 2-year-old in this case sometimes. Not to say everybody is like this, but it's like if you make the decision for them, they don't like the decision automatically.
Right.
But if you can help them find the decision themselves or whatever, it's a whole different energetics.
Yes.
So anyway, but Mom, we're out looking for a place for her to live, and it was a little like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I mean, one place would be I was like, I'm coming here on vacation. I'm booking a room here. I mean, it looked like a totally gorgeous spa location somewhere. And, all she could say was, I don't want to dress for dinner every night. I don't want to look all formal. These people were too formal. I wouldn't fit in here. And so then, we would go to another one where I'd be like, Mom, I just don't like the way that the halls feel and whatever. But then we settled on the one that she ended up going to, called Casa de Campanas, House of the Bells. It was a former nunnery.
Oh.
Yeah, in Southern California. And so that's where she decided she wanted to go. And so we went about the process of moving her from her home into that location. So here she is at Casa de Campanas. She's settled in. She's starting to meet friends there. And she starts to document her life with an assistant. And she'd already been doing that our whole lives. She was always a scrapbooker. She was always documenting everything. But this was documenting her life and her parents and all of that. So that really did occupy a lot of her time. And she enjoyed it. And she enjoyed meeting these new friends. And she enjoyed being a part of a community where people were doing things in a safe, kind of chaperoned way, like go to a play at night, where she would never do that alone, or even probably with a friend, unless it was she was really confident in her friend. This is like, a little mini bus of the elderly group pulling up at a theater and having fun together. So she really did enjoy that. And everything went fine for about 3 years or so. And then finally, she had this assistant that came in once a week that was helping her document her life. And that finally the assistant called me and said, I think it's time for us to unplug her stove, unplug her oven. She was still living in independent living, within the confines of the independent living wing of a larger facility that also had those other steps of care for elderly. And so we unplugged her stove, and I don't even know if she wasn't cooking anymore anyway. I don't even know if she knew that we did that. But that's kind of where that would kind of clips what was working at the time, at the new location where she was, and how we got about moving her into that facility. It really was through her proactive stance on the end of her life, through that getting ahead of it, it allowed us space as a family to create memories, at least we could remember, in those last few years of her life. And we were able to, rather than dealing with what would appear to be a falling house of cards of one emergency after the other, we were able to just step in to what she ended up making as the framework for the safety that she needed to feel.
Right. Yeah.
What about that for a family? I mean, Allison talked about being, relief. Strike that, Jeff. We don't know if Allison's going to be in there. Our family certainly felt the relief from my mom putting a structure around her and allowing us to support her and not have to make those decisions for her, basically.
Right.
What does that do in the end when we're looking at getting ahead of the end?
Well, as you talk about the structure that your mom put in place, a lot of the work that I do, particularly when I'm teaching class or holding community events, we talk about setting a container. In setting a container, what that means is creating the space that will hold what it is that we're doing, that will hold the intention of what we're hoping to experience, whether that's within the classroom, whether that's within a community event, whether that's in a ceremony that I'm facilitating, like a wedding. I recently did a wedding, and we want to create the structure or the container that then holds the experience. And your mom coming to it from this place, essentially what she did was create the container that held the experience that you guys got to have with your mom, which the end result is that you all had time to actually spend quality time with her. You had time to enjoy those things that you guys did do together. She had time to work on documenting her life and going to plays. And she had that time because she made the choice to move herself into a situation that was supportive for her. And I love that you spoke about helping her find the place that worked, because that Kirsten is this quality of life that we're talking about, that getting ahead of the end offers a person, a family, because it was something you guys did together. It wasn't you and your sisters getting together and saying, oh my gosh, we have this situation. We have to move mom. She can't stay in her house anymore. It's gone too far, too long. We have to do this in the next month and scramble to just put her somewhere, right? That you guys actually had the opportunity to do it together. And she moved in willingly. She gave up her car willingly. You guys created, and very much by your mother's forward thinking, the container that was able to hold your experience as a family, where you enjoyed each other's time, even though there were challenges, right? This is not to say that you're not still going to go through your emotional challenges. Those still exist. But you have the bandwidth to actually move through the challenges at that juncture, because it's not just one more thing. And it's not that place where everybody's feeling contentious or defensive or burdened or victimized or exhausted or all those things that can happen when the situation or the dynamic is one where it is not being, the decisions are not being made together. Their decisions are being made in the moment because there's a reactionary place of, oh my God, we got to deal with this, as opposed to, let's talk about this. Let's look forward and see what's coming and how do we want to work with this. And being able to get ahead of it actually offers everybody the opportunity to have a much different quality of experience with that person.
It was certainly, I mean, it was still it was still a mess. I mean, at time, my God, it was a mess at times.
Mm-hmm.
But the messy times were minimized.
Yeah.
I think because
Yeah.
of that preparation that
Yeah.
she went through. And it definitely it gave me a vision of, even with my mom with dementia, it gave me a vision of how the planning and getting ahead of all this does take a huge stress off the loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
Huge stress.
Yeah. Well, it's an internal positioning. It allowed you and your sisters to be able to work with what was happening from a place of realizing we are managing this. We are getting ahead of it. We are being prepared for what's coming, which allowed you guys, in your own ways, dealing, of course, with your own emotions, but to come to an internal positioning of realizing that you were stepping up and being able to do the roles that were being asked of you. You know, each one of you had a different way in which you were assisting your mom. And everybody, it seemed like, you know, from my perspective, everybody was actually in the role that best suit them. And so nobody was left having to do something where they thought, wow, I hate this whole thing. I mean, of course, you might not be loving what you're doing for the circumstances, but you're in a position, a role where you're executing something that's kind of in your wheelhouse, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we are going to take a break, and then we're going to hear what Kirsten has prepared for us today in terms of pairing from a country that has gotten ahead of the end. Stay tuned.
Next up, Kirsten's choice for a wine to open after the show.
If you have a friend who calls you and is crying and who needs some support from long distance, consider sending a gift from Uplift Gift. These are curated, beautiful packages of comforting items that will take care of your friend if you can't be there in person. Uplift Gift, when words aren't enough.
Now, what wine will Kirsten choose for your table tonight? Here she is.
Welcome back. All right, wine time. Kirsten, Ms. Fox, what have you prepared for pairing our show today?
Well, thank you for asking, Danielle.
Yes.
All right. So I have been following and very curious of what is happening as the climate is changing in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone in the wine industry, many people are focusing on this because of the warmer. Grapes can only grow in certain regions or latitudes around the band, around the circumference of the world. And so those bands of ability to ripen grapes are moving north and they're moving south in the world. And so I just was looking at an article the other day about how Germany is expanding their offering of Pinot Noir. They call it Spätburgunder there in Germany, Spätburgunder, and actually the area that has grown Pinots for quite a while is the Air Vineyard, the Air Valley, and they've been producing Pinots. They're a little bit different Pinots than we may be used to from Oregon or even Burgundy. They're really more on the red fruit side of things, like cherry, strawberry, raspberry. They don't get as ripe as especially some of the California Pinots. They don't get into the black fruit at all, but very red fruits. But they also have a very big profile of damp leaves, damp earth, mushrooms. So they really are strong in that category. Plus they have some cinnamon, kind of some spice, clove, that kind of thing as well. They traditionally have been almost like if you took Pinot lovers and then you divided them into like the 10% that really like super light Pinots that are almost watery Pinots. That would have been the people that would be attracted formally to German Pinot Noir. It's very light. It's so cold there. And less sunlight. It's hard to get the grapes really ripe. But in this case, it's warming up, and Germany, as a country, has decided to really embrace this new warmth, and they're starting to plant more Pinot Noir grapes, and so that they basically are moving into a richer style of Pinot. They're not there yet. It's only gone up 2 degrees. It's not like it's changed in a huge way. But as they get ahead of that warmth, they will be ready as the earth warms up to start producing and continue producing, but yet also start into a new style of Pinot. And they're getting ahead of it. And so just like with the show we're talking about today, where, my mom and her proactive stance on getting ahead of her end of life so that we were allowed to really step into a space she created to have the richest relationships at the end of her life. This is what Germany is doing. They're stepping into climate warming. They're decided to not, try to plug their ears and close their eyes, and they are planting more Pinot Noir, and they are moving into that with open arms. And we'll see what happens to their industry. But if you get a moment, I would grab a German Pinot Noir and make a toast to them getting ahead of the end. So with that, any questions about the wine?
So with the climate change that's happening and them embracing the change and looking ahead and saying, well, our temperature's changing, let's move to Pinot Noir. Does that mean that some of the wines that they have traditionally produced will no longer be able to be produced because the climate is changing?
Yes, that's where we're going with this kind of thing. Right now, I think most of the regions that are seeing this, they're getting ahead of it. They are starting to plant varietals that are, that next step, but that doesn't mean that yet the grapes they're currently growing, the varietals they're growing are going, south yet. But certainly in 150 years, probably some of those varietals that they had traditionally planted, Riesling, you can grow it in a warm region, but most Riesling is grown in cooler regions. So that might kind of, fall away a bit, or move or morph into a warmer style of Riesling than the cool, crisp Riesling that they have right now. So yes, you're absolutely right. That's what will happen. And they are moving with the trend of the warming versus plugging their ears and eyes and, saying, no.
Right. Go Germany.
Yeah. So, we're seeing this all over the world.
Right,
I just took that now. Anyway, so no, don't write us letters, Australian winemakers. Yes, we know you're getting ahead of the end as well. Not the end. Ahead of climate warming. Anyway, thank you so much for sticking with us through this interesting and we all face this in our lives, this type of decision making and challenges. It's not something that we all like to talk about, but thanks for sticking with us, and stay tuned because we've got another couple episodes coming your way in this focus of the end of life. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for joining.
We look forward to sharing a new story and wine with you next time. Thanks for tuning in to Wines and Wonders.